You do not have to carry today into tonight. Whatever happened between waking up and this moment, lying here in the dark, with the day finally behind you, it does not need to travel any further than the edge of this bed. Let it stop here. Feel the weight of your body settling into the mattress, your shoulders releasing whatever they have been holding since morning, your jaw unclenching by degrees, your breath slower now than it was even a few minutes ago. There is nowhere left to be tonight. There is nothing left to prove. Somewhere in you, quietly, there may be something you are still holding on to. Not something someone else did to you. Something you did, or something you did not do. A moment you keep going back to, turning it over, wishing you could reach into the past and hold it differently. You have been carrying it like a stone kept in a pocket, reaching in every so often just to check that it is still there, still sharp, still exactly the shape it was on the day it happened. Tonight, we are not going to solve it, and we are not going to explain it away. We are going to do something quieter than that. We are going to help you finally set it down. Just breathe for now. That is the only thing being asked of you in this moment. We will get there slowly, the way everything worth arriving at is arrived at slowly, without force, without rushing the parts of you that are still tender. Tonight's idea is this. There is something you have been doing to yourself that you believe is responsibility, and it is not responsibility. It is something else, wearing responsibility's clothes, and once you can see the difference clearly, you will understand why it has not been working, no matter how long you have kept doing it. Here is the belief, almost universal, rarely spoken aloud. If you feel bad enough for long enough about something you did or did not do, it will eventually mean something. It will function as proof that you take it seriously, proof that you are not the kind of person who does something wrong and simply moves on unaffected. The suffering itself becomes a kind of currency. Continue to pay it, and somewhere, some invisible ledger stays balanced. Stop paying it, and the ledger, you fear, goes unpaid forever. Worse, you become, in your own eyes, the kind of person who did not care enough to keep paying. This is the quiet architecture behind most self-punishment, and it explains why so many thoughtful, reasonable people hold on to guilt for years past any use it could possibly still have. Not because they enjoy suffering, because some part of them has confused two entirely different processes and fused them into one. It is worth separating them clearly tonight, because they were never meant to travel together. The first process is accountability. Accountability is the honest recognition of what happened, an accurate accounting of the cost, and, where it is available, an act of repair. Accountability has a natural endpoint. It can be completed. You see what you did. You understand who it affected and how. You do what actually be done, an apology, a changed behavior, a different choice next time, a returned kindness. And then, having done what was genuinely possible, accountability is finished. Not because the event stopped mattering, but because continuing to revisit it accomplishes nothing further. The second process deserves its own name because calling it guilt is not quite accurate either. Call it sentencing. Sentencing is the quiet, usually unconscious decision to keep suffering indefinitely, long past the point where any accountability remains to be done, because some part of you believes the suffering itself is the point. Sentencing has no natural ending by design. It cannot be completed because completion was never actually its function. Its function is simply to continue as evidence of how seriously you took it. Here is where the confusion actually comes from, and it is worth naming plainly because almost no one ever names it directly. If accountability has an ending and you allow yourself to reach it, some part of you fears what that will mean. It fears that reaching the end of your guilt is the same as declaring the thing did not matter. It fears that setting the weight down is the same as saying it was fine. It fears that the moment you feel lighter about it, you become, retroactively, someone who never should have felt bad in the first place. Someone careless. Someone who got away with something. This fear feels protective. It feels like moral seriousness. But look closely, and a strange fact emerges. The sentencing does nothing to the original event. It does not undo it. It does not repair it any further than accountability already has. It rarely even serves whoever, if anyone, was hurt by what happened. It only continues to cost something, night after night. And the one it costs is not the person from that day. It is you, now, the version of yourself lying here tonight, being asked to keep paying a debt that was never actually owed, in the currency of ongoing suffering. Guilt was supposed to be a signal, not a life sentence. And most people, quietly, have been serving a sentence for a signal that finished delivering its message years ago. Consider how strange this becomes once you see it directly. If a smoke alarm sounds because there is smoke in the kitchen, and you deal with the smoke, open the window, put out what needed putting out, the alarm's job is finished. You do not keep the alarm sounding for the next several years to prove that you take fires seriously. The alarm did its job the moment it alerted you. Guilt works the same way. Its entire function is to alert you that something you value was violated, so that you notice, and so that you change something if change is genuinely warranted. The moment you have noticed and changed what needed changing, guilt has finished its job completely. Anything after that is not moral seriousness. It is the alarm still sounding in an empty kitchen, long after the smoke has cleared, because some part of you is afraid of what the silence would mean. A kitchen fire announces its own ending clearly. The smoke clears, the air freshens, and there is no ambiguity about when the danger has passed. Guilt rarely comes with such a clear signal, and this is part of why the sentencing continues so easily. There is no bell that rings the moment enough has been felt, no clean visual cue the way there is with smoke lifting from a room. In the absence of a clear signal, many people default to a rougher, less reliable measure instead, simply continuing until the discomfort itself starts to feel unbearable, as though unbearable were the same thing as sufficient.
It is not. The absence of an ending signal does not mean there is no ending point. It only means the ending point has to be decided honestly rather than waited for passively, since the automatic alarm this time is not going to switch itself off for you. Think of the friend who forgets to congratulate you after good news, feels a flush of shame days later, and apologizes sincerely once they realize. You accept it easily, because the apology matched the size of the mistake. That is accountability. Complete, resolved, finished. Now think of a different version of that same friend, one who instead spends the next 6 months describing themselves as a bad friend anytime the subject comes up, refusing every reassurance, treating the mistake as though it defines something permanent about their character.
That second version has not become more accountable than the first. They have simply drifted from accountability into sentencing, and the sentencing is not making them a better friend. It is only making them a more exhausted one, and quietly asking you, the person who already forgave them, to keep managing a guilt that no longer has anything to do with you. Or think of the version of yourself the day after you lost your temper with someone you love, said something sharper than you meant, apologized, meant it, and watched the relationship recover in the days that followed. That is complete. Now think of the version of you who, months later, still winces internally every time the memory surfaces, still privately rehearses the worst version of what was said, still treats yourself, quietly, as someone permanently capable of that cruelty, someone who must remain forever on watch for it. This is not the same act of care as the apology was. It is a different thing entirely, one that keeps extracting a cost long after the original debt was settled in full. Most people believe that the depth of their guilt is proportional to the depth of their character, that a good person feels bad for a long time, and a person who moves on quickly must not have cared very much. This is almost exactly backwards. The length of time someone suffers is not a reliable measure of how much they cared. It is far more often a measure of how afraid they are to let go, how convinced they have become that the suffering itself is required, how deeply they have confused sentencing with love. A person who completes the accountability honestly and then allows themselves to set it down has not cared less than the person still awake at midnight 3 years later, replaying the same 5 seconds. They have simply been shown something the other person has not yet seen. The wait was never actually required to keep the debt honest. The debt was honest the moment it was acknowledged. Everything after that is punishment, quietly mistaking itself for payment. The hardest part to hear tonight, and perhaps the part most worth hearing, is this. Your ongoing suffering was never actually protecting anyone, not the person who may have been hurt, not your own character. It has only been protecting a story you have been telling yourself about who you have to keep being in order for what happened to still count. It is worth asking, honestly, why this particular trap catches the most careful people hardest, the ones who already try, already apologize, already notice their own impact more closely than most. The answer is almost the opposite of what it seems.
People who did not care at all rarely spend a single night on this. The sentencing shows up precisely in those who care the most, because caring is exactly what the mind mistakes for the raw material of the punishment. If you did not care, there would be nothing to punish yourself with.
It is only because the care is real that the mind can convince itself the suffering must be real too, as though one were proof of the other. But they are not the same thing, and confusing them does not honor the care. It only exhausts the person carrying it for no further benefit to anyone. This is worth sitting with for the rest of tonight, not as an argument to win, but as a door quietly opening. Because once you can see the difference between accountability and sentencing clearly, in someone else's life first, and then eventually in your own, something in the chest tends to loosen that has been held tight for a very long time. Let us walk through this a little further now, slowly, because there is more underneath it, and the night is long, and there is nowhere else you need to be. There is a version of you that did the thing you are still punishing yourself for. It is worth being precise about this, because it is easy to skip past, and it changes everything. That version of you, the one standing in that kitchen, saying those words, making that choice, missing that moment, was operating with the information available in that instant. The sleep they had gotten that week, the fear they were carrying that they did not yet have language for, the model of the world they had been handed by everything that came before them. They were not a finished person making a careless decision. They were an unfinished person, doing the best a limited, tired, frightened version of a human being could do in that specific hour, with what that specific hour gave them. The version of you lying here tonight is not that person anymore. Not because enough time has passed to earn a clean slate, but because you are, quite literally, a different configuration of the same self. You have slept differently since then. You have learned things since then, some of them because of exactly what happened. Your nervous system has been shaped, even slightly, by the very event you are punishing yourself for. In a very real sense, the person capable of doing better already exists, right now, in this room. And the person you are still sentencing does not exist anywhere except in memory. Here is the reframe worth carrying past tonight. You are not being asked to decide that what you did was fine. You are being asked to stop sentencing someone who no longer exists. Let us sit with 2 full scenes now, because an idea like this lives best inside a specific person, in a specific moment, rather than as an abstract description. Here is the first. A woman is lying awake tonight, and the thought she keeps returning to is a phone call with her mother, made in a hurry on a Tuesday, months ago. There had been a small disagreement about holiday plans, whose house, which weekend, who would need to travel. She was tired that day, rushed between 2 obligations, and she said something clipped, something dismissive, something she would never have said with more sleep in her, more patience in her, more time in her. The call ended flatly. She meant to phone back that weekend and smooth it over, the way she always did, the way the relationship always absorbed these small frictions and moved on. 3 days later, her mother had a stroke that changed her speech permanently. The easy back and forth they once had, the quick calls, the small arguments that resolved themselves within a week, all of it changed shape overnight into something slower, more careful, more precious, and irrecoverably different from what it had been. The clipped phone call was, without either of them knowing it at the time, the last conversation they would ever have in the voice her mother used to have. She has spent months now treating that phone call as a verdict on who she is as a daughter, replaying the sharp tone she used, wondering what it would have cost her to be softer that day, building in her mind an entire moral case against herself, using 5 ordinary, tired minutes on an ordinary Tuesday as the entire body of evidence. But here is what is true, and worth saying gently. She could not have known that Tuesday was the last of its kind. No one gets a warning that an ordinary conversation is about to become the final version of something. She was tired and imperfect and human, in the exact way every daughter on every ordinary Tuesday of her entire life had been tired and imperfect and human, without consequence. Until this particular time, the consequence arrived anyway, entirely unrelated to the tone of her voice. The stroke was not caused by a sharp sentence about holiday plans. The sharp sentence did not create the illness that followed it. These two things happened to occupy the same week, and her mind has been welding them together into a single object ever since, because grief needs somewhere to stand, and blame is often the nearest available surface. What she actually needs, and what almost no one tells her directly, is not more evidence against herself. She needs permission to separate what she did, which was ordinary and human and forgivable, from what happened afterward, which she did not cause and could not have prevented. The relationship she has with her mother now is different, and it is real, and it deserves her full presence, not a presence divided by an ongoing internal trial about a phone call that ended the way thousands of ordinary phone calls end. Setting the guilt down is not the same as deciding the phone call did not matter. It is refusing to let one tired Tuesday stand in for the entire truth of who she has been, across every other day, to the woman she still gets to sit with and talk to and love, right now. Here is the second scene. A man is lying awake tonight, replaying an evening from several years ago, when his son was 9, and knocked over a glass of juice at the dinner table, after an especially long week at work. He had raised his voice, sharper than the moment warranted, said something about carelessness that he still remembers word for word, and watched his son's face fold inward, small and stunned, before quietly going quiet for the rest of the night. He apologized within the hour. His son, being 9, forgave him within the hour too, the way children often do, more easily than adults ever manage to forgive themselves. That should have been the end of it. But the father has kept the moment alive for years, pulling it out at random hours, examining his own harshness from every angle, wondering what kind of father raises his voice at a 9-year-old over spilled juice, building, slowly, an entire private verdict that he is, underneath everything else, the kind of man capable of frightening his own child. Here is what is true, and worth saying plainly. One sharp evening, apologized for, forgiven, and never repeated in that particular shape again, is not evidence of who a father is. It is evidence of what exhaustion does to ordinary, decent people on ordinary, difficult days. His son does not carry that evening the way his father does. His son remembers, if he remembers it at all, an unremarkable dinner from years ago, followed by an apology, followed by thousands of other evenings that were warm and steady and safe. The father is the only one still living inside that single evening, treating it as the true version of himself, when the far more accurate version of himself is the pattern across the thousands of other nights, the one spent reading bedtime stories, driving to practice, sitting quietly beside a hospital bed once, showing up again and again in all the ordinary ways that never make it into a private trial, because they were never dramatic enough to demand one. It is worth noticing, too, that neither of these stories required a villain. No one arrived that day intending harm. A tired daughter, a depleted father, an ordinary evening tipping sideways under the weight of exhaustion neither of them chose. Most of the moments people spend years punishing themselves for share this same quiet shape. Not cruelty planned in advance, but capacity running out at an inconvenient hour in front of someone who mattered. Seeing this clearly does not erase what happened. It simply places it back in the category it always belonged to, human limitation meeting an ordinary hard day, rather than the category guilt keeps insisting it belongs to instead, some deeper proof of who you fundamentally are underneath everything else. Notice something both of these people share. Neither of them is cruel. Neither of them is careless. They are simply doing what an anxious, caring nervous system has been trained to do for as long as either of them can remember, treating a single difficult moment as a referendum on an entire character, when a single moment was never large enough to hold that kind of verdict in the first place. There is a third scene worth sitting with, quieter than the others, because it touches something closer to absence than to harm. A person is lying awake tonight thinking about a friend who went through a difficult divorce 2 years ago, who asked for company on a particular evening. A simple request, just come over, I do not want to be alone tonight. And this person, exhausted from their own week, tired in a way that felt entirely reasonable at the time, said they could not make it, and offered a version of tomorrow instead. The friend said it was fine. The friendship continued afterward, on the surface, unchanged, but something quieter shifted underneath it, a slight distance that neither of them ever named directly, and the two of them speak less often now than they once did. This person has spent 2 years treating that single declined evening as the reason the friendship faded, turning it over, wondering what would have happened if they had simply shown up.
But friendships rarely fade because of one evening. They fade slowly from 100 small currents, most of which have nothing to do with any single choice either person made. Punishing yourself for one cancelled evening does not restore the friendship as it was.
It only keeps you from being fully present in the friendship as it is now, quieter, different, but not gone, still available to whoever is willing to actually show up in the version of it that exists today, rather than continuing to mourn a version from 2 years ago that cannot be recovered by any amount of private penance. Here is a useful distinction worth carrying past tonight, one that separates real repair from private punishment, because they can feel identical from the inside. Real repair moves outward. It says something to the person involved when that is possible. It changes a behavior going forward. It offers something concrete, an apology, a different choice, a returned kindness, something that exists in the world and not only inside your own head. Private punishment moves nowhere. It circles entirely within you, producing nothing the other person ever receives, changing nothing they ever experience, offering no one anything except your own continued discomfort, which you have quietly mistaken for love. If you notice, honestly, that the thing you are doing tonight has produced nothing outward in years, no apology delivered, no behavior changed, no kindness returned, only the same private replay again and again, you are very likely not repairing anymore. You are sentencing. And the moment you can see that difference clearly, the sentence begins to lose some of the grip it has held on you for so long. Consider, too, a small and honest question, one worth asking of any guilt that has outlasted its usefulness. What exactly is this guilt still accomplishing? Not what did it once accomplish, when it first taught you something, when it first changed how you treated someone. What is it accomplishing right now, tonight, this particular time you are revisiting it? In almost every case, when this question is asked honestly, the answer is nothing. There is no lesson left to extract that has not already been extracted. There is no repair still waiting that this particular round of suffering will finally produce. There is only the familiar ache, visited one more time, out of habit, rather than necessity. There is a mother somewhere tonight doing a quieter version of this same thing, carrying guilt not for something she did, but for something she was simply unable to do. Her own parent grew ill several years ago, and for 18 months she managed the appointments, the medications, the late-night calls, while also raising 2 children and holding down work that did not pause to accommodate any of it. There were evenings she snapped at her children out of sheer exhaustion. There were weeks her own health quietly declined, unnoticed, because there was no room left to notice it. Her parent has since passed, and what she carries now is not simple grief. It is a specific, corrosive guilt about every evening she was short-tempered, every appointment she rescheduled because something else demanded her more urgently, every moment she was simply too depleted to be as present as she believes, looking back, that she should have been. But there was no version of that 18 months where she had more to give than she gave.
She was operating at capacity, and often beyond it, and the shortness she showed on her worst evenings was not a failure of love. It was the visible edge of a person who had already given nearly everything she had. Punishing herself now for the limits of a body and a mind that were already stretched as far as they could go does not honor her parents' memory.
It only adds a second exhaustion on top of the first, this time with no one left who needs the care, only a version of herself that continues, quietly, to be sentenced for the crime of having been human under an impossible weight. Let your breath slow a little further now. There is nothing left to solve tonight regarding any of this. There never really was. Not through more replaying, not at this hour. Here is a phrase worth carrying with you, quietly, past tonight and into the coming days. Guilt was never the price of the mistake. It was the smoke. And you have been standing in the smoke long after the fire went out, checking, again and again, whether it is still burning, by breathing it in one more time. What tends to actually help, gently, without force, is something closer to a completed accounting than an argument won. Not deciding the thing did not matter, deciding instead that it has been fully accounted for. You see what happened, you understand the cost. You have done, or you are willing to do, whatever repair remains genuinely available, and having done that, you are permitted, finally, to close the file. Not because closing it erases what happened, because keeping it open no longer serves anyone, least of all the version of you who has to live inside the open file every single night. There is a simple, almost embarrassingly small practice worth trying tonight, and it works precisely because it asks so little of you. When the memory returns, as it very likely will, rather than following it back into the trial, you can simply say to it, quietly, "I already accounted for this." Those words become the boundary. There is nothing further owed here tonight. You do not need to argue with the thought. You do not need to prove your case one more time. You only need to notice that the case has already been heard and closed, and that reopening it tonight adds nothing but one more sleepless hour to a debt that was settled long ago. Notice for a moment where your body has been holding what your mind will not release. Guilt rarely stays only in the head. It settles into the chest, into a jaw that stays tight even hours after the thought has passed, into shoulders that curl slightly forward, as though bracing for a verdict that was actually delivered a long time ago. See if you can find that place in your body right now. Not to force it open, just to notice it, the way you might notice a light left on in another room. Often, simply seeing it is enough to begin the process of it switching off on its own. You were not the villain of that story. You were a tired, limited, human person, doing what tired, limited human people do, on an ordinary day that happened to matter more than you knew at the time. That is not an excuse. It is simply the truth, and the truth has always been kinder than the sentence you have been serving in its place. There is one more scene worth sitting with tonight, quieter than the others, because it is not about anyone you may have hurt. It is about a promise you may have broken only to yourself. A man in his early 40s lies awake tonight, and the thought circling him is not a sharp word or a missed evening. It is a version of himself from nearly 2 decades ago, who wanted to build something of his own, who had drawn up plans on the back of a notebook, who told a handful of people, quietly, that he was going to try. He did not try. Not really. Fear arrived first, dressed as practicality, and he took the safer position instead, the one with the steady paycheck and the predictable hours. And he has told himself ever since that he is someone who quits before things get difficult, someone who talks about courage, and then, when it matters, chooses comfort. He has carried this verdict for 20 years, reaching for it in quiet moments, the way someone touches a scar to confirm it is still there. Every time an opportunity has appeared since then, a new idea, a different path, some quieter risk worth taking, he has waved it away before it could even be considered, because the verdict has already been delivered. He is someone who does not follow through. Why would this time be any different? But look at what actually happened that year. Honestly, the way you might look at someone else's year rather than your own. He was 23. He had very little saved, a family that depended on his income, and no one in his life who had ever done what he was imagining doing. No model to borrow courage from. The fear he felt was not weakness. It was an accurate read of genuinely high stakes, made by a young man with limited information and no safety net beneath him. He did not fail a test of character that year. He made a reasonable decision under real constraint, and then spent the next 2 decades treating that reasonable decision as a permanent verdict on his nature. Here is what almost no one tells him directly. A single choice, made once, under specific conditions that no longer exist, is not a character trait. It is an event. Character is not what happened in one difficult year. Character is the pattern across an entire life, and his pattern includes 20 years of steady, unglamorous responsibility that nobody applauds because it was never dramatic enough to notice. He is not a man who quits. He is a man who made one cautious decision at 23 and has been serving a life sentence for it ever since, using a single data point to overwrite an entire body of evidence to the contrary. The version of him lying here tonight is not 23 anymore. He has savings now. He has different obligations, different resources, different knowledge entirely. If some quieter version of that old dream returned tomorrow, in whatever smaller, more honest shape fits the life he actually has now, he would be meeting it as an entirely different person, not as the frightened young man who once said no. Continuing to punish that young man does not return the 20 years. It only prevents the man he has become from noticing that he is, in fact, free to begin something new, starting tonight, if he ever wants to. Notice across all of these scenes the same quiet mistake, dressed differently each time. A single moment, a single choice, a single limitation gets treated as though it were the entire verdict on a person, when a verdict that size was never available from evidence that small. You are not the worst 5 minutes you have ever lived. You are not the one decision made under fear, or exhaustion, or grief, or youth. You are the whole pattern, the thousands of ordinary choices that never needed defending because they were never dramatic enough to be placed on trial. And no honest court examining a whole life would ever convict a person on the strength of a single Tuesday. There is an old idea worth borrowing here, about a ship and an anchor. An anchor is useful exactly once, when a ship needs to stop moving and hold its position against a current. But a ship that keeps its anchor thrown long after it needs to be anywhere in particular does not become safer for it. It simply stops going anywhere. Guilt kept long past its purpose works the same way. It was useful the moment it told you something mattered, the moment it asked you to notice, to repair, to choose differently. Kept longer than that, it stops protecting you from anything and starts only preventing you from moving toward wherever you were actually headed. You are allowed to raise the anchor now. The current you were once worried about has already passed. There is a photograph worth imagining, too, one you may be carrying without realizing it. Somewhere in your mind, there is a single frozen image of yourself, taken in the exact moment of the mistake, the sharp word, the missed evening, the year you did not try. You have been holding that photograph up next to yourself every night since, comparing the living, breathing, changed person you are now to a picture that stopped changing the day it was taken. A photograph cannot grow. It cannot learn. It cannot apologize, or soften, or become more patient with time, the way the actual person in it has. Every time you measure yourself against that old photograph, you will come up short, because you are comparing a whole, moving life to a single frozen instant that was never capable of representing it fairly. It may be time to put the photograph down, not to pretend it was never taken, only to stop asking it to speak for the person you have become since. Let your breath settle a little further now. There is a quiet, honest question worth asking yourself, one last time tonight, gently. If someone you loved came to you carrying exactly this, the same words, the same missed evening, the same abandoned dream, and asked whether they deserved to keep suffering for it indefinitely, what would you tell them? Most people, ask this question honestly, discover they already know the answer, and that the answer is far gentler than anything they have been offering themselves. You would tell them it was one moment in one hard season made by a person doing their best with what they had. You would tell them they are allowed to stop. It is worth extending yourself the same sentence you would have no trouble extending someone else. This does not mean forgetting. It does not mean pretending the cost was smaller than it was. It means closing the file honestly,
the way a fair court closes a case once the facts have been heard, and the sentence, if any was warranted, has already been served. You have served it. Whatever debt existed has been paid many times over, in sleepless hours, in private replays, in years of carrying weight that was never asked of you by anyone except the part of you still afraid to put it down. Tonight, that part of you is allowed to rest too.
There is one final way of seeing this worth naming plainly, since debt is the language guilt so often borrows anyway, even without meaning to. A debt collector, once a debt has been paid, once the terms have been fully settled, is required to stop calling. The account is closed. The file is marked complete. But most people carry an internal collector who never received that particular memo, who keeps calling on a debt that closed months or years ago, using the same script each time, the same low tone of warning, regardless of whether anything is actually still owed. You do not have to keep answering that call tonight. You are allowed to let it ring through to silence. Notice how quiet it feels just to imagine that. Not fixed, not resolved with fanfare. Just quiet. That is what the end of an old debt actually feels like, most of the time. Not a celebration. A kind of silence where a familiar noise used to be. You may notice the old thought try to return one more time before this segment ends, the way old thoughts often do, out of habit rather than necessity. That is all right. It does not mean nothing has changed tonight. It only means a habit this old does not dissolve in a single sitting. Each time it returns, you are simply being offered another quiet chance to say, gently, the account is closed. Let your shoulders drop a little further into the bed now. Let your hands go soft, however they are resting. There is nothing left to prosecute tonight. There never really was, once the accounting was honestly done. What remains now is only the truth, plain and unpunished, that you were a person, doing your best with what a given hour gave you, and that this has always been enough to be forgiven for. There is one more scene worth including here, smaller in scale than the others, but familiar to almost anyone who has ever managed a household budget under pressure. A woman co-signed a loan for a family member several years ago, against a quiet worry she chose not to voice at the time, wanting to be generous, wanting to help, wanting not to be the one who said no. The loan went bad within the year, and the repayment fell to her, quietly reshaping what her own family could afford for the better part of 3 years afterward. Smaller holidays, a delayed repair on the house, a tighter month more often than she would ever have chosen on her own. She has spent those 3 years treating the decision as proof of her own poor judgment, replaying the exact conversation where she said yes, certain that a wiser version of herself would have seen it coming and said no instead. But she made that decision with the information available at the time, trusting someone she had every reasonable prior basis to trust, choosing generosity over suspicion in a moment where either choice could have gone badly. She did not cause the loan to fail. She made a caring decision that carried real risk. The risk arrived, and she has been paying a second cost ever since. Not in money this time,
but in the quiet, ongoing verdict that she is careless with what her family needs. She is not careless. She is someone who trusted once in good faith and absorbed a hard consequence with more grace than she has ever given herself credit for.
Perhaps you are wondering, quietly, what forgiving yourself is actually supposed to look like in practice, since it can sound, from the outside, like a single dramatic decision made once and then simply held forever after. It rarely works that way. It looks smaller than that, and far less dramatic than the guilt it replaces. It looks like noticing the old thought arrive, and instead of following it all the way down into the familiar trial, saying quietly, "I have already accounted for this." It looks like doing whatever small, real repair is still available, an honest word to someone, a changed habit, a returned kindness, and then genuinely letting the matter rest once that repair has been offered. It looks like treating yourself a way you would treat a friend who came to you with the exact same story, with patience, with proportion, with the plain observation that one hard hour does not undo an entire life of trying. It also looks like tolerating the discomfort of an old habit not being reinforced tonight. The part of you that has practiced sentencing for years may feel unfamiliar, even slightly unsafe the first few times it is not fed. That discomfort is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is simply what a long habit feels like in the early hours of being set down. It softens with repetition, the same way the guilt itself once hardened with repetition. What was built slowly can be released slowly too, and slowly is still real. There is no single moment tonight where the debt will announce itself as finally, officially closed. There will simply be a night at some point ahead of you, maybe not tonight, maybe not this week, when the old thought arrives, and you notice that it has grown quieter than it used to be, less urgent, more like a memory, and less like a verdict. That is what forgiveness actually feels like from the inside. Not a thunderclap, a gradual, almost unremarkable quieting, the way a room gets darker so slowly at dusk that you cannot name the exact moment daylight left it. You do not have to rush that process tonight. You only have to stop actively feeding the version of it that keeps it artificially loud. The rest happens on its own time, the way most real healing does, quietly, in the background, while you are busy simply living the rest of your life. Let this be enough for tonight. The case has been heard. The cost has been counted honestly. Whatever repair was possible has either been made or is still gently available to you in the days ahead, whenever you are ready to offer it. Nothing further needs to be decided tonight, and nothing further needs to be relitigated before you are allowed to close your eyes. Some of you are carrying tonight may involve a person you can no longer speak to, a parent who has passed, a friendship that ended without a final conversation, someone who moved on or moved away, or is simply no longer reachable in any way that would let you say the words directly to them. This is worth addressing plainly, because it is often the heaviest version of this weight,
and the one people are most convinced has no path forward at all. If there is no one left to accept your apology, some part of you may believe the debt can never actually close.
But repair was never only the words spoken directly to the person involved. Repair also lives in the way you carry what they taught you forward, in the changed patience you now offer someone else who reminds you of them, in the kindness you extend to their memory by living differently because of what happened between you. A letter never sent can still be written, read aloud once in an empty room, and mean something real, even though no one but you will ever hear it, honoring what someone would likely have wanted for you: more rest, more patience with yourself, less midnight litigation over a conversation long since finished, is itself a form of repair, offered to the relationship, even though it can no longer be offered directly to the person. The debt does not require their signature to close. It only requires your honesty and your willingness to let the accounting be complete. There is a final piece of this worth understanding before we let it rest, because it explains why holding on to the sentence so often backfires in exactly the way people most fear. Most people keep punishing themselves because some part of them believes the punishment is what prevents the mistake from happening again. If I stop feeling this bad about it, they reason, quietly, I might let my guard down and do it again. The truth runs almost exactly the other way. Harsh self-judgment narrows attention down to threat and defense. It floods the same system that guilt was meant to inform, until there is little capacity left over for anything except managing the shame itself. A person deep in shame is not more equipped to choose differently next time. They are more depleted, more reactive, more likely to repeat some version of the very pattern they are punishing themselves for, because shame consumes the exact resources: calm attention, steady patience, a clear head that a better choice actually requires. Compassion works differently, and this is worth hearing clearly because it sounds at first like the softer option, when it is actually the more effective one. A person who can say, honestly, "That was a hard moment, I understand why it happened, and here is what I will do differently," has more capacity left over for that different choice than a person still consumed by proving how sorry they are. Kindness toward yourself is not the reward for having earned it through enough suffering. It is closer to the actual mechanism through which a different future becomes possible at all. The harshness you have been offering yourself was never the guardrail you believed it to be. It has been the very thing draining the resources you would need to become someone new. This is worth carrying forward quietly past tonight. You are not being asked to forgive yourself because you deserve an easy pass. You are being asked to forgive yourself because it is the only version of this that actually leaves you more capable, not less, of being the person you are trying to become. The sentence was never protecting anyone. It was only using up the very strength that repair requires. Let this settle now, without needing to be examined any further tonight. You have looked at this honestly. You have not excused anything. You have simply seen it clearly, perhaps for the first time, and clarity like this does not need to be argued with any further once it has arrived. Let your breath grow slower now.
There is nothing left to hold. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to forgive yourself tonight.
Not because it was nothing, because it has been enough. The account is closed. You do not have to keep checking it. You were doing your best with what that hour gave you. That was always true. It is still true now. You are not the worst moment you have lived. You are the whole of your trying across every ordinary day. The sentence is over. You can put it down. Whatever it was, it does not need you awake anymore. You have already paid what needed paying. Let your jaw soften. Let your hands open. You do not have to earn your own kindness tonight. It was already yours. It was always going to be yours. Tomorrow does not need you to arrive ashamed. It only needs you rested. So let the old story close now, gently, without another word said in its defense. You did not get everything right. No one ever has. You are still worth resting fully, exactly as you are. Picture for a moment a single room, quiet, at the end of a long hallway. Every door behind you in that hallway is closing now, softly, without slamming, without needing to be checked twice. Each one holds a version of you that already did what it could, already learned what it came to learn, already finished its part in this. You do not need to walk back down that hallway tonight. You are only here, in this last quiet room, where nothing further is required of you, except to breathe, and let your body finally believe that it is safe to stop. The light in the hallway behind you dims, slowly, the way a house settles into stillness at the end of a long evening. You are allowed to be still. You are allowed to let this be the end of it for tonight. Sleep now. There is nothing left to hold on to. Sleep.